Arch-Philistine Jeremy Bentham, that insipid, pedantic, leather-tongued oracle of the ordinary bourgeois intelligence of the 19th century. Bentham is among philosophers what Martin Tupper is among poets. Both could only have been manufactured in England. So Jeremy Bentham was an English philosopher and current zombie exhibit at UCL. He's widely considered to be one of the fathers of utilitarianism, which is broadly understood as a liberal moral philosophy which seeks to increase the amount of good in the world, or pleasure if you're nasty, and, reduce harm. Its central tenets are consequentialism, hedonism, and impartiality. By the utilitarian framework, an act is morally good if and only if it produces the highest level of pleasure or the least amount of suffering for the greatest number of people. To achieve its goals, utilitarianism relies on a rationalistic moral mathematics, which is inseparable from the liberal worldview. For centuries now, it's been one of the key moral frameworks of bourgeois liberalism. But in our neoliberal age, in these dark neoliberal times, a new project has emerged. One which, despite the claims of some of its adherents, is reheating the leather tongue of Jeremy Bentham and reproducing a new bourgeois morality for the neoliberal age. Effective altruism. It's slimy. Is this bit worth it? Ugh. So let's start with an understanding of what effective altruism is from the mouths of some of its most prominent figures. Theron Plummer and William McCaskill, who's sort of become a figurehead of this new movement, described EA as
a growing global community of people who use reason and evidence to assess how to do as much good as possible and take action on this basis. Launched in 2011, the movement now has thousands of members and influence over billions of dollars. The movement has substantially increased awareness of the fact that some altruistic activities are much more cost-effective than others, in the sense that they do much more good than others per unit of resource expended.
Bear in mind that word, cost-effective. So in a recent TED Talk, because of course there's a TED Talk on effective altruism, McCaskill listed what, in his view, are the three biggest problems in the world today.
But I and others in the effective altruism community have converged on three moral issues that we believe are unusually important. First is global health. The second big priority is factory farming. Now, the third area is the one that I want to focus on the most, and that's the category of existential risks. Events like a nuclear war or the global pandemic.
Note the absence of capitalism here. For McCaskill, the way to most effectively deal with these problems is for individuals in the global north to donate more money to charities. Not just any charities, though. Charities which have been scientifically deemed effective in their dollar to life saved or improved ratio. To ascertain whether or not a charity is effective, McCaskill advocates for reductive methods such as randomized control trials or QALYs, that is, quality adjusted life year, a measurement used in economics to rationally allocate health resources most cost effectively. These are reductive in the sense that they must necessarily reduce social phenomenon to quantifiable, testable measurements. So for McCaskill and EA in general, these methods of measurement are the gold standard, quote, gold standard in deciding whether or not a charity should receive your money. But, of course, no individual can possibly assess the effectiveness of a given charity by these standards, so the EA movement has established some charity aggregators like GiveWell, the premier EA org, which, not incidentally, was founded by two hedge fund managers. These aggregators just basically tell followers of EA which charities are the most effective by their own measurements, and therefore are places which individuals should send their money. The individual utilitarian calculus is exported to these elite technocrats, essentially. So EA uses a rationalised moral mathematics to encourage its adherents to objectively or impartially distribute a portion of their income to maximise the amount of good in the world, according to their terms, and it is this consequence of maximising good which is most important. While many EAs, including McCaskill himself, will argue that effective altruism isn't utilitarian or, quote, any normative theory or claim, it's clear from his next sentence that this is obviously horseshit. Effective altruism is the project of using evidence and reason to try and find out how to do the most good, and on this basis, trying to do the most good. Clearly, if you're making a claim about how to do the most good, you're making a normative claim that not doing this would be bad. If you're not doing the most good, then that's bad, right? Or at least less good. You can't run from your own reasoning. Something McCaskill actually does quite a lot. The cat is yelling at me. I know, Puss. I know. But you can't come in. EA may not be exactly the same as utilitarianism in all circumstances, but they're clearly deeply connected, as is further shown by the fact that one of their biggest supporters, someone to whom McCaskill dedicated his book How to Do Good Better, is Peter Singer, perhaps the most famous explicit utilitarian still working, and not, incidentally, one of the most repulsive ableist sacks of shit around. Singer has used his rational utilitarian calculus to repeatedly make arguments like this, and a big ableism trigger warning here.
When the death of a disabled infant will lead to the birth of another infant with better prospects of a happy life, the total amount of happiness will be greater if the disabled infant is killed. The loss of happy life for the first infant is outweighed by the gain of a happier life for the second. The total view treats infants as replaceable, in much the same way as it treats non-self-conscious animals. Utterly repulsive. Truly repulsive.
This violent dehumanisation of disabled people isn't incidental to Singer's utilitarianism, by the way, but as I'll get to in the next section, is endemic to this kind of moral reasoning. But the point I want to get at here is that clearly effective altruism is in many ways just a reheated utilitarianism. In my personal opinion is that the only reason they actually tried to say that EA isn't utilitarian is to give their project a sense of novelty. No one gives a shit about a bunch of philosophy professors doing utilitarianism again, but an innovative way to do good by doing nothing except giving to scientifically proven good charities? One weird trick to save the world? Sign up every fucking tech billionaire on the planet! Although, it's not really poverty that the Elon Musks of the world really give a shit about, is it? What's really got the tech billionaires fucking rock hard, and actually for me, what is the nail in the coffin of EA being just reheated utilitarianism, is the other side of the effective altruism coin, long-termism. Long-termism, as promoted by McCaskill in his book, takes the impartiality aspect of utilitarianism and supercharges it. Impartiality for utilitarianism, and EA for that matter, is the notion that moral decision-making must be made beyond personal proximity or justice issues. So for example, you have just as much responsibility to help someone across the world from you as you do your own mother. Peter Singer, again, has promoted this idea when he said that looking after his own mother while she had dementia was a mistake, because he could have just as easily used the money that he used to take care of his ill mother to more effectively help more people. He's a real rational economic man, Peter Singer.
Emotion will be suppressed and reason will prevail.
Reason will prevail!
Oh, yeah.
Long-termism takes this notion of impartiality and bizarrely extends it across time, not just by a generation or two, but by thousands and billions of years. In fact, McCaskill and Grieve have argued that for the purposes of evaluating actions, we can in the first instance often simply ignore the effects contained in the first 100 or even first 1,000 years, focusing primarily on the further future effects. Short-run effects act as little more than tiebreakers. Fucking tongue. So, global warming, poverty, these issues are likely not going to result in the total extermination of humanity, so the utilitarian moral calculus dictates that the issues killing real people now, are second to so-called existential risks, as McCaskill says in his TED Talk. Risks which could wipe out humanity before we reach our species potential to reach the stars and colonize the planets.
The human race has been around for about 200,000 years. And if she lives as long as a typical mammalian species, she could last for about 2 million years. The Earth will remain habitable for 500 million years to come. And if someday we took to the stars, the civilization could continue for billions more. Future people don't participate in markets today. They don't have a vote. It's not like there's a lobby representing the interests of those born in 2300 AD.
The way he describes the human race as she weirds me out, man. It feels like some weird womb natal shit, doesn't it? And that kind of comes back later, but oh, it's gross.
The trillions of hypothetical lives that one day might exist in this idealized future because of, the impartiality and utilitarian piss maths, get a shirt, are worth more consideration than the mere billions of lives that actually exist today. This is how you maximise utilitarian good. And it's this obvious shite that has the tech billionaires drooling. EA organisations which now control almost $50 billion globally to fund anything are putting that money towards AI research to stop a hypothetical AI singularity or towards asteroid preparedness. The kind of sci-fi shit that really gets these tech freaks going. And I'm not saying they're inherently unimportant, but the utilitarianism of EA and long-termism is really on display here through the ordering of 8 billion current actual people living as less important a good maximising consideration than the trillions of future imaginary people. Imaginary future people. Either way. And this really gets to why I'm making this video. Beyond being a catty little bitch about something that annoys me. Where's my fucking fan? Once again, we have to bring it out. It is actually very warm in here. Effective altruism and long-termism has become powerful. It's a movement which controls billions of dollars, which is affecting the ways in which movements can organise, and which has senior figures like Toby Ord advising the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, US National Intelligence Councils, the UK Cabinet Office, and the Secretary General of the UN. It's not just annoying and wrong, but I think it's actively part of the ideological and material structures of liberal capitalism, and with the power it wields, that makes it fucking dangerous. The ideas of the ruling class are, in every epoch, the ruling ideas. That is, the class which is the ruling material force in society is, at the same time, its ruling intellectual force. The ruling ideas are thus nothing more than the ideal expression of the dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. I know that's not from Capital. I don't have a copy of the German ideology, so movie magic. We're doing movie magic this time. If I were a more competent YouTuber, I would have bought a scientist outfit and done a whole bunch of ironic theatre in this section about breaking down your perception of science as a method of deriving objective truth and thereby revealing the limited nature of effective altruist epistemology. Unfortunately, I'm just going to tell you about it, maybe with a whiteboard prop though. Almost 4 years I've been doing this. Almost 4 years. Effective altruism has been criticised many, many times on its epistemic claims. That is, on the ways it claims to know how an altruism is effective. Yet in the face of critiques, many EAs will simply say,
oh, we're continuing to refine our process and we'll become more effective and more accurate with time.
So more than just critiquing their methods here, I'm going to show that EA is simply unable to grasp the complex social whole of the world, while reproducing the worldview of the systems which cause the problems it purports to solve. There's no refining this process, no polishing this turd. You know the phrase, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter? That's kind of what EA is doing. It's just rolling bullshit in glitter. Science glitter. So the central nub of the issue for effective altruism comes down to rationality. Their entire methodology, outlook, project relies on a particular ideal of rational scientific objectivity. But this notion of objective rationality is not a free-floating concept developed outside of any notion of normative value, but the product of specific social and economic arrangements. Cartesian rationality, derived from the work of Descartes, is in fact the product of the development of capitalism and colonialism. And more than that, it is an essential feature of that development and of the systemic reproduction of those things. Descartes' conception of rationality, famous from the formation, I think, therefore I am. Head empty, no thoughts. I'm not. I am nothing. The Ken mantra. His conception of rationality created a fundamental distinction between man as the knower, and I do specifically mean the gender category of man here, and the rest of reality as objects to be knowed.
So this epistemic ideal splits the subject, that is, mere you, from the object, that is, what we're studying, and creates this ideal of objectivity, as if, again, knowledge is a thing separate from the knower, which can be universally obtained in the same way. Knowledge is conceived of as a universal object rather than as a particular social relation.
This epistemic ideal created a mechanistic view of reality where we can objectively and impartially quantify the great machine of nature. This understanding of the world, tied together with the emergent capitalism and colonialism, is not just fundamentally individualistic. I think, therefore I am, can only be understood as a view of humans as atomized individuals rather than beings fully themselves in relation to other humans and other animals and the wider social context in which they live. But by constructing certain groups as being capable of the ideal rational thought and others as being unable, the Cartesian rationality creates divides between those who are fully human and those who are not, those who are subjects and those who are objects. As I've spoken about in other videos, the development of capitalism required the separation of production and reproduction, with the reproductive role devalued and shouldered by women. Alongside this process was the separation of rationalised, impartial or objective thought, which was considered necessary for capitalist industry and therefore masculinised, from emotion and sentiment, which was feminised, thereby rationalising a gender binary and excluding women from the category of human. Remember Peter Singer and his rational economic man.
Reason will prevail!
Oh, yeah.
Counterposed against his sister, who was seen as emotional and somehow a failure on her part to want to take care of her elderly mother. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. It's fucking science, man. It's just science. And you can see this play out all the time. Scroll Twitter and you'll see women being equated with nature and spirituality against this sort of over-rationalised man. Which is not to say that women should get to be rational and men emotional. That would just be, recreating the divisions which we're trying to break down. But that the very division between rational and emotional is a false Cartesian construction. Just a manifestation of this material and epistemological break from the development of capitalism. Facts do care about your feelings.
Don't wanna fall in love, I just wanna get fucked. Traveling mountains is edible stuff.
Between 1500 and 1700, an incredible transformation took place. Living, animate nature died, while dead, inanimate money was endowed with life. Increasingly, capital in the market would assume the organic attributes of growth, strength, activity, pregnancy, weakness, decay, and collapse obscuring and mystifying the new underlying social relations of production and reproduction that make economic growth and progress possible. Nature, women, blacks, and wage labourers were set on a path towards a new status as natural and human resources for the modern world system. Perhaps the ultimate irony in these transformations was the new name given to them: rationality.
We'll be so much richer, we can solve so many problems that are intractable today. So if this is kind of a graph of how humanity has progressed in terms of total human flourishing over time, well, this is what we would expect future progress to look like.
It's just science! And similarly, with slavery and colonialism came the obvious requirement to exclude black and indigenous people from the category of human via their exclusion from the ability to engage in rationality. You know, there's a very famous John Locke bit about how indigenous groups in America couldn't rationally use the land and therefore it was okay to take the land from them. This is part of this subject-object distinction where these indigenous people who can't think rationally about the development of their land are just objectified. They're not humans anymore, they're objects which aren't as human as us. For black people particularly, this is very visibly ongoing, especially within the EA movement, with high-profile EA and long-termist figures like Nick Bostrom having written and subsequently defended the eugenicist idea that black people are genetically predisposed to lower IQs, itself a rationalised, quantifiable metric of something fundamentally unmeasurable. William MacAskill has also printed support from Sam Harris in his book and appeared on Harris's podcast, despite Harris being a public supporter of the racist work of Charles Murray, who's, I'm sure as many of you know, most famous for his book The Bell Curve, in which he argues that black people are genetically, intellectually inferior.
People don't want to hear that intelligence is a real thing. People don't want to hear that a person's intelligence is in large measure due to his or her genes, and that there seems to be very little we can do environmentally to increase a person's intelligence. And they certainly don't want to hear that average IQ differs across races and ethnic groups.
Exclusion from the rational category of human and objectified. Science. And recalling Peter Singer's ableism, this fetishization of IQ and intelligence goes hand in hand with the devaluing of the lives of disabled people, who Singer consistently frames as being lower than some animals, literally dehumanizing them and excluding them from the realm of subjecthood and into becoming objects. Ableism is not a bug of this, but a feature. And these features are particularly apparent in MacAskill's long-termism book. One of MacAskill's core points in that book is that provided a person had a sufficiently good life, the world would be a better place in virtue of that person being born and living that life, and thus safeguarding the continued reproduction of all the imaginary future people. This formation is wonderful in how it manages to be both an anti-abortion, pro-life argument as well as a eugenicist one, along the lines of Peter Singer. It is a moral good if a child comes into the world, so a moral wrong if they don't. However, if someone decides that a particular standard of life is not sufficiently good, then that child not being born would no longer be a moral wrong. Disabled people have long been oppressed and attacked because of this exact reasoning. But MacAskill caveats his argument somewhat to try and shield himself from criticisms like this by making statements declaring that people, should be able to have children should they wish to. But such statements stand outside of the reasoning he presents, making the decision to have children such a central moral good within the analysis obviously leads to a certain political project being fueled, and simply stating that he wouldn't like anti-abortion advocates to draw on his work, he doesn't even really acknowledge the eugenicist side of this. It doesn't adequately deal with the political implications for his reasoning. You can't run from your own reasoning, William. You can't run from it all the time. If you don't believe in eugenics or anti-abortion sentiment, then maybe don't engage with theories that justify those positions.
And remember that weird way that MacAskill was talking about the human race as a she? I think this kind of ties into this strange epistemological position of women within effective altruism broadly, but also Cartesian rationality, the strange position that women hold as part of this rationality. They're the caregiving, the nurturing, the womb of life as sort of as embedded within this kind of thought, which I think you can still see throughout this. It sucks.
Willfully or not, it's a complete lack of attention to the politics of ethics. Which is, an absurd thing for a philosopher to do. Frankly, I think it's quite dishonest. In her video on EA and long-termism, in which I did the voice of William McCaskill, check it out, Philosophy Tube made the point that McCaskill should have consulted some women when he was writing this book. Which is true, but I think the issue goes much deeper than this. The reason that he didn't, and the reason that he can't bring proper feminist analysis or disabled thought into his work, is because the epistemology he and his entire movement subscribes to is wholly dependent on objectifying women and disabled people.
Just fucking science!
This objectification of other groups is shown extensively in the way in which McCaskill treats the abolition of the slave trade. In long-termism, he justifies why we should care about the distant future with reference to a value lock-in. That is, history is guided not by material processes, but by values. Therefore, we should try to lock in the best values possible for the future. Putting aside that this is simply ignorant of all radical Marxist history and theory, this notion of value lock-in is not built on any historical theory. It appears as a vacuous, ill-evidenced justification for the values produced by Western free market societies. And McCaskill tries to justify that value lock-in as a thing that matters by arguing that, counter to economic understandings, Britain outlawed slavery primarily because of a value change, which was ended slavery forever. That's it. Crucially here, by trying to prove his value lock and long-termist bullshit, McCaskill has to emphasise the moral role of Britain in granting abolition to slaves. Slave revolts, wars, revolutions in Haiti is not considered as important as the values of British elites. Slaves themselves have very little agency in this story, and the logic at play reproduces long-standing, ugly British exceptionalist attitudes to slavery and abolition.
Fucking science! Fucking science!
The Cartesian split between the white human rational subject and slaves as objects, not people, is crystal clear here. There's no room for agency except that of the rational white British elite, a feature which I'll argue later is clear within effective altruism. So with this in mind, is it any wonder that the EA movement is, according to its own survey, 75% white and 66% men? And this is important because the movement is going for a diversity and inclusion drive. Even if it was representative, the underlying epistemologies are fundamentally white supremacist, patriarchal and ableist. There's no reforming that out of the movement.
So I've got an idea for you, Leathertongue, or at least the person I'm about to quote does. What if unequal social conditions produce an unequal circulation of ideas, enabling some intellectual positions to assume preeminence over others, not because of their truth value, but because of their degree of compatibility with ascendant structures of the dominant economic system? What if that? What if that? You wouldn't be able to figure that out, Tom.
So a social movement which relies on white patriarchal epistemologies, which takes as its subjective premise the rational economic man, homo economicus, attracts white men? Shocking. I am shocked. But what about all the billionaires? Do they give a shit about all this stuff? I think what we have to remember is that the force of this Cartesian epistemology is not like McCaskill's value lock-in theory. Rather, it's the product of the material forces of the development of capitalism and the pervasive power of commodification. Things billionaires fucking love. They love commodifying shit. Anything. Shove something in front of them, they'll commodify it instantly. The rationality of this leather-tongued bourgeois morality of effective altruism is the result of a process within capitalism known as reification. This is a process through which
All domains of knowledge and experience are subjected to an increasingly formal and standardised treatment, in which there is an ever-increasing remoteness from the qualitative and material essence of the things to which bureaucratic activity pertains.
And this occurs as a specifically capitalist project as
the objective needs of capital require the commodity structure to penetrate society in all its aspects and to remould it in its own image, causing the structure of reification to sink more deeply, more fatefully, and more definitively into the consciousness of man. Reification is thus the means by which every phenomenon, independently of its real and material distinctiveness, is subjected to an exact calculus.
So the reification of the commodity form and the spread of its logic throughout society serves to rationalise, quantify and atomise all aspects of social life, including, importantly, charity giving, to serve the purpose of capital accumulation. We just need to look at McCaskill's reliance on marginalist economic theory, a central theory for neoliberal economics, or his glowing description of certain people as moral entrepreneurs. Ugh. As well as the constant use of qualies to evaluate the cost effectiveness of particular actions to see how EA is expanding the commodity logic into this field of altruism. And this use of qualies appears particularly heinous in the context of COVID-19, where this cost-effective logic is used to murder disabled people en masse by denying them healthcare and ranking their lives as less important than some economic value, all in the name of cost-effectiveness. This murderous result of epistemic objectification is on display. And really, this cost-effective logic is so central to so much destructive neoliberal austerity governance. And, I hate to talk about neoliberalism again, but it's right fucking there. But more than this, reification is atomizing in that it results in a destruction of every image of the whole, whereby every object, every individual, every social process is reduced to a singular object and its connections to a social whole, like capitalism, is entirely obscured. And it's this obscuring that means that no matter how much effective altruism claims to be an unbiased science, which refines its methodologies, its central commitment to rationalise doing good means it can never deal with the fundamental causes of harm. It can never deal with capitalism and exploitation. It is doomed to mistake its own rational and formulistic mode of cognition for the only possible way of apprehending reality. EA remains helpless before the complex mediation of culture, society and economy, unaware that the world lying beyond its confines, beyond the plate, and in particular its own underlying realities, lies methodologically and in principle beyond its grasp. If society really did consist merely of quantifiable facts, then EA's faith in dispassionate reason and calculation might be justified. Alas, society does not resemble the rational scheme that effective altruists attribute to it, leaving the latter blind to the irrationality of the total process. Fucking science! Fucking science! Okay, now I need to get that. Or else the cat will eat it. And frankly, I don't think EAs really even want to deal with the fundamental causes of capitalism, with Robert Wiblin, the head of the EA organisation 80,000 Hours, which tells people which jobs are the most effective for doing good. He was also the former executive director of the Centre for Effective Altruism, saying,
"Effective altruists are not usually radicals or revolutionaries." Shocking. I personally favour maintaining and improving mostly market-driven economies, because according to him, capitalism is the best system for producing good, and sudden dramatic changes in society usually lead to worse outcomes than gradual evolutionary improvements.
I guess we should all just be happy to sit on this not so slowly sinking ship in case any sudden and dramatic change actually makes things worse. It's also excruciatingly clear from McCaskill's work that he has no interest in challenging capitalism, having used liberal developmental arguments to call for the increase in sweatshops in the global south, because nothing improves lives like the economic development that sweatshops bring.
We'll be so much richer, we can solve so many problems that are intractable today.
Not calling a halt to the system of exploitation and extraction which destroys the global south entirely, which forces people into working in sweatshops, but an increase in exploitation. Genius! Who could say why billionaires like this? It's fucking incredible. Fucking science! Just science! It's just science, isn't it? Fucking science. Oh, it sticks to the microwave. That's gross. Ugh. I hate this thing. I hate it so much. Oh, it feels so horrible. God, I could say so much more here, but the video length is expanding, and I know that with each second more of you drop off. So I'll just draw this section to a close by summing up. Effective altruism wants you to believe that it objectively and impartially aggregates the most effective ways for you to do good in the world. But in doing so, it relies on an epistemic rationality which exists to support and justify capital accumulation, patriarchy, white supremacy, and ableism. This rationality, which is at the heart of effective altruism and which cannot be extricated from it, means that even if they tinker with their methods to avoid another embarrassment, like promoting the famously bullshit campaign like deworming as the gold standard of effective charity giving. A hilarious turn of events, by the way. Whole chapter in McCaskill's book is about how deworming is one of the best effective charity giving, and it turned out to be completely bullshit. Completely bullshit. And you know, if my project relied on effectively predicting which charity giving was going to be most effective, I would consider that a fairly fucking major fuck up. But, you know, even if effective altruists respond to this hilarious fuck up by saying, oh, we just need to really improve our methodologies, they'll actually never be able to offer either any real analysis of the problems facing the world or any real solutions. In fact, in my view, effective altruism as a movement is directly contributing to the harms of global neoliberal capitalism. Oh, a cat. Cat. No, you can't come in. Can't come in, Puss. So I'm sure there are people watching this right now thinking to themselves, sure, effective altruism might be wrong and it won't overturn capitalism or whatever, but surely they're doing some level of good by encouraging people to donate to charity. And I understand that impulse. But with this video, I want to encourage you to think more holistically, not reductively like the EAs do. And I do think this style of defensive EA is falling into the same epistemic hole that effective altruism occupies. So here I'm going to lay out how not only is their epistemology flawed and reproduces capitalist logics, making them unable to do good, but that actually contributes to active harm. So let's begin with an easy point. EA as a social movement encourages fundamentally individualistic action, which acts as a moral salve to stop people engaging in more direct collective action. Everything from its epistemic roots, which, as I've argued, are fundamentally individualistic and create as its subjective premise this rational economic man, not social classes, to its prescribed action, which is all about how much good you as an individual can individually do by giving money to charity. You know, first of all, this is clearly just not a realistic way of actually producing social change on a wide scale, which can only really be achieved collectively. But importantly, this logic also, I think, acts as a way of suppressing collective action. If you're told that the way you can do the most good is by just giving to charity, then what's even the point of engaging in collective action? You've done your bit, you've filled out a form on a web page, and that's the most you can do. Just sit back and have a fucking cup of tea. Moreover, this focus on charitable giving is just the latest way in which the wealthy can justify their wealth. From Andrew Carnegie to Bill Gates, the rich have always given away part of their wealth, which in turn justifies that wealth. And in fact, this individualistic nature of EA lends itself to the view that you have a moral duty to earn as much as you can, as much as you possibly can, so that you can give that money to charity, thereby justifying the conditions which produce harm, and in the process making billionaires rock fucking hard. Making them just rock fucking hard. Now, effective altruists will say that they've recently stopped pushing earning to give. McCaskill now promotes morally neutral or positive careers like a hedge fund manager, management consultant, or tech startup. The EA site 80,000 Hours, the one Robert Weblen who hates sudden dramatic change, he used to be the executive director of it or whatever. That site now promotes jobs in the US fucking security state, which is something I would categorise as harm. Some effective altruists have hit back against this critique that it is individualistic, with one guy, McMahon, arguing that
I am neither a community nor a state, and that I can determine only what I will do, not what my community or state will do.
Which is a wonderful defence, because it simultaneously misunderstands and reinforces the critique. The thing is, nobody's saying that an individual can dictate how a state or community acts, and that's precisely the terms of the critique of individualism. The point of the critique is that it reduces the level of analysis and the scope of action down to what individuals can and cannot do. It is concerned with individual action, not class action. It, in fact, serves to obscure the possibilities of class action, as McMahon here seeks to do. And this all gets to a second critique from McMahon, another fucking gold standard on the critiques, when he argues that condemning individuals for not taking revolutionary action and only taking ameliorative action, like given to charity, is like condemning a doctor in a war zone for not stopping the war in the first place. Unfortunately for McMahon, this is bullshit, but also another absurdly individualistic understanding of the world. It reduces the whole of social life to what a particular individual can or cannot do. It also assumes that the acts of charity giving are simply goods and not bound up in relations which perpetuate harms in the first place. I can't get into it all now, but there's simply decades and decades of research which argues that charities often serve to stabilise terrible conditions, allowing those conditions to perpetuate. Even if the charities very effectively save lives, they often maintain the global relations of harm, exploitation, and death which require those charities in the first place. And on top of this, returning to this notion of subject and object, the entire premise of effective altruism is that people in the global north should give money to the global south and solve their problems. Putting aside for a second that this obscures the ways in which that wealth is accumulated in the global north in the first place, it also recreates the exact epistemological split that I spoke about earlier. There's a concept in Marxism called interpolation. The classic example from Althusser is that when a police officer calls to you and you respond, you're accepting the social relation of police and policed. A power relation is re-established. And similarly, when effective altruists engage in this kind of charity, they are recreating the subject-object distinction of Cartesian rationality. Just like McCaskill's view of the abolition of the slave trade, the peoples of the global south are simply objects to be saved by the subjects of history. Fucking white men in the global north. And this dynamic feeds into another which causes immense harm. As objects in the need of saving, the money which gets fed into EA charities is not controlled by the people who are being helped. This leads to powerful actors, massive powerful actors like Billionaires deciding what's best. With EA's fundamental connection to developmentalism and the interests of billionaires, this means that market solutions are often what's promoted. For example, the Gates Foundation, which is a darling of EA, frequently funnels money into marketising areas of the global south in the name of developmentalism.
We'll be so much richer, we can solve so many problems that are intractable today.
Free markets which perpetuate the expansion of global imperial capitalism and actually facilitate the extraction of wealth from the global south into the hands of the people who are supposedly helping them. We can also see this penchant for market solutions in McCaskill's breathless promotion of carbon offsetting as the most effective way of dealing with climate change. A famously bullshit fake solution, but one which perpetuates the very market order that EA loves. The market order which is the cause of global warming in the first place. Science! And in fact, this love of market solutions is what really cements effective altruism as not just a liberal leather tongue of bourgeois morality, but a neoliberal one. The very existence of the global charity system requires global markets and corporations, and as EA has become more powerful and influential, it has increasingly forced a market frame on charities. This has been extensively documented within the animal rights movement, which EA apparently holds as a central tenet. Because EA holds a cost-effective market logic for determining the value of charitable endeavours, it's those charities which adhere to the market logics, which tend to be much larger, which are deemed most effective, and then they get the money, and then force the entire field to morph into a further marketised hellhole, and forcing those organisations which can't fit easily into the market frame to fail. I've seen this exact dynamic play out for disabled people's organisations in neoliberal Britain, as those groups which can't prove their cost effectiveness of their organisation get their funding withdrawn, while the larger, more established, more market-oriented, more liberal organisations receive the bulk of the funding. The neoliberal dynamic of effective altruism is not just supporting pre-existing harmful charity orders, but actually, amazingly, making it worse. But this isn't the only harmful neoliberal aspect of this terrible project.
And that's not all.
One essential part of neoliberalism is the exporting of social reproduction to private or market hands. Under neoliberalism, charities have increasingly stepped in to fill the social reproductive roles left absent by the state. Just look at the explosion of food bank charities in Britain under austerity.
I think that there is good within food banks, and to have charitable support given by people voluntarily to support their fellow citizens, I think is rather uplifting and shows what a good, compassionate country we are. And as I say, inevitably the state can't do everything. So,
as neoliberal marketisation expands to require charities to fill this social reproductive role, so too does EA work to ensure that the charity sector is as marketised as possible. EA then is not just compatible with neoliberalism, but is playing an important role in its expansion. And I call that harm. That's another thing I will firmly tick down as harm. So we can see one final way in which EA is really compatible with neoliberalism, and that's with its kind of moral technocracy. So like I mentioned at the start, a single person can't possibly evaluate the evidence of which charity is most effective by EA standards, and so that responsibility has to be exported to a technocratic elite for them to dictate back how to engage with this charity market. In that sense, any control over market intervention by the people is eroded. And when combined with the earlier point about billionaires controlling vast swathes of charity funds with no democratic oversight, not least by the people most affected, we can see just how elitist and morally technocratic effective altruism is. And I think you can actually see this neoliberal mode and how they operate as a social movement. And in fact, some effective altruists have just come out and explicitly said that they should model their mode of gaining influence on the way neoliberalism gained power. Which is, like, suspicious.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
But you can see that that is what they've done. They haven't built a collective class movement, but they've got key technocratic elites, key individuals, into influential positions. Remember Toby Ord. And such technocracy becomes a problem even within the effective altruism movement, as its movement leaders appear not to trust people getting into it with the full scope of what the movement stands for. Namely, they often don't trust people to be on board with the weirder ideas of long-termism, and so focus on global poverty as a sort of marketing and onboarding strategy, which is gross. It might be effective, who knows, but it's gross. As people become more deeply involved in effective altruism, they become more indoctrinated into accepting these weirder ideas, no longer advocating for poverty reduction, but for, I don't know, making nice trousers for whatever AI god they're building a shrine to.
It's the wrong trousers, Gromit, and they've gone wrong. Stop them, Gromit, stop them!
So this has been described as a funnel method of movement building, where the wide end attracts lots of people with uncontroversial ideas. But as they reach further down the funnel, they gain more power, more influence within the movement. Oh, wait a second. Oh, fuck!
It's a pyramid scheme.
It's not a pyramid scheme, it's a reverse funnel system.
Turn it upside down.
God damn it! Shit!
All right.
This individualistic, neoliberal influenced mode of movement operation reflects the fundamentally neoliberal, marketized nature of effective altruism. It's through its individualism, its market obsession, and its neoliberal dimensions that effective altruism doesn't just not do good, but actively does harm. Remember McMahon's point about not criticising a doctor in a war zone for not stopping the war? Well, what if the doctor was also a fucking general in an invading army? Then you could fucking criticise them for that, couldn't you? Effective altruism, that insipid, pedantic, leather-tongued oracle of the ordinary bourgeois intelligence of the 21st century. I can't put marks down because there's a fucking tongue on the microwave. We're calm. We're calm. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. So I wish I could go on forever about this topic, because the more you learn about EA and long-termism, genuinely the worse it gets. I didn't even get to the technological fetishism, really. Like, we brushed on it, but there's so much more bullshit. This cat is desperate to knock over this camera. But I've seen people taken in by this project. Oh my god, Puss. He is simply obsessed with getting on camera. You want to be a star, do you? Unbelievable. But I've seen people taken in by this project, and on one level it makes sense. It's a really easy to grasp way of pretending to yourself and others that you're doing good in the world, and you don't have to sacrifice your structural position of power to do so. Handy. Oh my god. But if you genuinely do want to make a difference in the world, effective altruism offers less than nothing. It offers harm. It offers the perpetuation of the social conditions which cause all the problems it purports to solve. It obscures that the social world is inherently relational, not made up of discrete, quantifiable objects, and it obscures that some things just aren't measurable. You can't measure with rank empiricism whether labour is free or coerced under capitalism. An effective altruist frame not only lacks the tools to reckon with such social interpretation, but actively obscures the possibility of such interpretation. It's become one of the most powerful cults in the world, and in my view, it does immense social harm. Anyone who considers themselves on the left and is tempted by it should abandon any temptations and just, I don't know, become a communist already. Jesus Christ. Throw this tongue away again. And the cat's going to eat it.
Alright, thanks for watching. This was a big beast. It's one of those videos that, like, the more I researched, the more I was like, I need to talk about this because it's hurting my head. As ever, if you enjoy my work and feel like you can support, no pressure because it's all terrible times right now, as we all know, but please sign up to Patreon, or I have a Ko-fi and a PayPal as well, and if not, just any shares would be appreciated. $10 and up patrons get their names read out, and $5 and up get their names in the credits. So I'll just read out those names of my lovely patrons right now. Demo Squid, Dying of Thirst, Katie Marshall, Nina G, Public Relations, FD Signifier, Lizzie G, Quint Wolf, Kim Crawley, Anita Anispe, Ellis Wren, Sophie, Hey Joe, Cameron Blakemore, TBS Kian, or TB Skian, apologies, Christopher Poff, Margussie, Daniel Kusid, Joshua Moldenhauer, Tom Price, Cade Soiree, Esoteric Fictionalism, Shingo, Austin Talman, Polo Lonergan, Robin, Rachel Mixon, Michelle Itch, Rich, Neil Zabelgard, Tinfoil Pancakes, Kieran Gore, Aga Ghost, Barney Carroll, Joel, Daniel Hughes, J. Fraser Cartwright, Aaron, Tamash Kissbetter, and Paul Singleton. I love you all. Please share around if you can. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Love you. Bye bye. Love you.